Dysfunctional Vet. This is part 6 of the case study of Amelia Earhart and how we lost her. On the left hand side you see Laos, New Guinea, and you have the track which runs up there with the arrow to Howland Island and the ship that's transmitting the signal. Down below that is Baker Island. You have the little compass north, south, east, west. You have a high pressure zone above her track and a low pressure zone below her track. When she's flying, and I've already explained this once before, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail at this moment. When she's flying her airplane, you can't just fly straight across like this. Because of the wind, you have to physically turn your aircraft. It's called crabbing, and now you can fly on that track to where you want to go. And I'm going on this assumption, and it is an assumption. I'm going on this because she is so far south of Howland Island, down here at Baker. There was probably, and it's conjecture, but it's not based on ignorance. It's conjecture that there was a high pressure up here and a low pressure down here. So when she turned the aircraft to crab, the aircraft itself still holds this true track, but because the high pressure zone pushes out on these lines and the low pressure pushes inward, her aircraft physically just shifted down to this position and she flew to the island. The big question for the viewer is, how is it that when she turned like this, she got pushed down here and didn't know what was happening? I'm about to explain that, but you need to understand something else. Amelia Earhart was an accomplished pilot. She's flown very small aircraft, bi-wings, or the bi-wing aircraft like the Sopwith Camel, as well as what we would consider a modern airplane today. She would have been subject to a lot of crosswinds affecting her flight, and the reason being is because those aircraft are very light. They're small and they're light. She was flying a Lockheed Electra, which is a larger aircraft and is not subject to those crosswinds affecting an aircraft the way it does a small one. Jet pilots who fly small private aircraft are frequently involved in crashes on landing, not on takeoff, but on landing. The reason being is when they're flying those big jets, which weigh tons, the aircraft is not subject to the crosswinds that the little ones are when they're flying. And I think that may have tainted her thinking a little bit, in that once she was in here, she wasn't thinking in terms of crosswinds. She had changed into the crabbing position to fly, but what may or may not have been known at that time, my flight school didn't go into what was known in the 1930s about air masses. But remember too, this is in the infancy of flying. She may not have known that she could be in this mass of wind moving down here. So let me explain how that happened, that she was aware of the fact that the aircraft could be moved around, and yet for whatever reason precautions were not taken and she ends up down here. Let's go into that. When you're flying, sailing, you have what's called dead reckoning, also known as dead reckoning trace or dead reckoning track. From point to point, you have the formula distance equals velocity times time. So if you're traveling 50 miles an hour and you travel for 2 hours, you've traveled 100 miles. D equals VT. You also have point to point, where time is the distance divided by the velocity. If you have 100 miles and you're dividing by 50 miles per hour, your distance divided by the velocity, it will take you 2 hours. You all know the formula. You can all figure this stuff out. When people sail or fly, they use what's called dead reckoning trace. They're leaving from a specific point. They're going to be following a specific compass direction for a specific amount of time, and they're supposed to reach wherever they're going. One of the historical sad points in aviation was when the Stardust was lost. Jets had just started to fly over the Andes Mountains, and the Stardust was flying and flew into a jet stream. The pilot did not realize that they weren't where they were supposed to be, and they flew into a cumulus granite. That's also called a mountain. They were covered by snow, and for about 50 years nobody knew where they were until some glacier explorers found them some years ago. This was actually covered on a PBS Nova program, and I think it was called the Search for the Stardust, something to that effect. And they found the aircraft when the snow had melted off of it after it got down to the bottom of the glacier. It took 50 years from where it hit to get down to where there wasn't any snow anymore. So pilots, including jet pilots, use dead reckoning or dead reckoning trace or track. It's still practiced today on aircraft and on sailing ships. Amelia Earhart, in all probability, in fact, I can pretty much tell you that she was piloting using dead reckoning. She took off from Laos. She had a compass direction. She would be adjusting that every so often to allow for curvature of the Earth using spherical trigonometry to get to where she was supposed to be. And she would stay right on track. I do not believe that Noonan was doing sun sights during the day, as I had said that if he had been doing, they would have known where they were at. I don't think he did any sights until they were close to the end of the flight, and I think at that point it was too late. Now there's some conjecture as to whether when she went from 7,000 feet to 10,000 feet if she burned a lot of fuel. I don't know. I wasn't on the aircraft. Somebody that has a lot more experience with aircraft, especially the Lockheed, would be able to answer the question. I know that the Lockheeds are incredibly forgiving aircraft, and they're very durable, and they can do some amazing things. I know that she would have burned off a lot of fuel by this point, and so the aircraft would have been lighter, but again, I'm not sure. The one thing I am confident of is that Noonan was taking sights in the evening because he got her on the right meridian in order for her to land. Wrong location, Baker Island, but still close enough that in fact there's a possibility they were using charts inside the book looking for a place to land. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm sure they would have had charts of that area, because had they been off course they would have needed to know how to get back. What we have here is the flight in hours with 0, 9, and then the 16 to 18 hour where they're going to be landing. They take off, and I believe that they're flying by dead reckoning. She has a compass direction, and she has altitude and time, and she can do her distance equals velocity times time. When they reach the 9-hour point, this is pretty critical. This is halfway. If they've drifted 250 miles south of their intended course, they need to correct that, because they only have another 900 miles to get that corrected before they've drifted even further down. So it's a critical point. They need a positive fix. I don't know if this was done. I don't know if it was planned. There's just so much that isn't known. But remember, every minute of drift represents fuel that's consumed, which, if they're 500 miles off course, that's going to be a critical issue to address. Now we come up to the 16, 18 hours when they should be landing. If she landed on Baker Island, as it's pretty well been established she did, she's now too far south. If she's low on fuel, she cannot get to her intended target. I mean, that's obvious. Okay? The other possibility if she had the fuel, she didn't trust the navigation. She didn't trust what Noonan was telling her, and that's a possibility. There seems to have been a lot of conflict between them whenever they were stopped. The other thing is, it's possible too that due to cloud cover they couldn't validate the fix. They were pretty sure where they were, but they just couldn't nail it positively. And that happens. That's the nature of navigation. And the other thing is, let's say that they had a real positive fix as to where they were, because she knows that she's on the right meridian and she landed just barely off of it. And that is, she may have been concerned about flying over water at night and having to ditch. And that's a real valid concern. In fact, that's a valid concern even today. When a pilot ditches in the sea, for him to be found is a real big deal. So her concern about a water ditch was definitely worth noting. Now, let's go forward. Let's say that she landed on the island where they think they found her. The Navy flies over, and they fly at 400 feet. Some tests have been done a little bit lower than that, and it was very difficult to see anything. If her ship had been, or if her aircraft had been washed over the side by the tides into the depth of the sea, her aircraft wouldn't have been visible on the shore either. So there's a number of issues to be aware of. But I'm going to conclude this up now. What I think happened was she flew between a low pressure and a high pressure, and she was moved south. Literally, she was like in a river, and the whole river is moving, and she's holding her compass course, but the aircraft is being slowly drifted to the south. At midpoint, again, a failure of imagination. No positive fix was made. As a result of that, she couldn't begin climbing back up in latitude towards the landing site, so that when she reached her 16 to 18 hours, and now everything is absolutely critical, she's way off course. Could have been a clash of personalities in the aircraft about all this. Nobody's ever going to know. It's all conjecture. But I think this offers the best explanation as to what happened. There are some engineers who try to figure out where she's at by listening to the signal, and then they decide how much of a signal they'd have using the I equals C over D squared. Or what that represents is, at the receiving point, the intensity that you hear is inversely proportional to the square of the distance. So they listen and they try to figure out how far out she is from the listening points. You can't do that. You can't even do that if you have a meter that's registering how many volts DC you're getting coming in on the deal. There's just too many variables. There's attenuation due to humidity. There's attenuation due to the signal being broken up by any number of different things in the air. There is no way that you can listen to a signal and determine distance. It's not possible. I know about that one from my time in direction finding also. Just a sidebar note, we had a ship that was transmitting, I think, on 25 or 30 watts of power. It was a real strong signal. Very, very strong. Sounded like he was right there beside us, and he was about 2,000 or 3,000 miles south of the location that I was at. I was at a northern direction finding station, and the majority of people that we helped were fishermen. In fact, a lot of fishermen. But the point I'm getting at is, the guy was transmitting 20 or 30 watts of power, and we could hear him like he was right in the next room with us. So that doesn't fly. And then again, we've had bigger ships, commercial fishers, like the Japanese have, and they would be transmitting, I think this one was taking on water, if I remember. They were transmitting with probably 4,000 or 5,000 watts of power, and we could barely hear them. We got a decent line bearing, got another ship out there to help take on people, and I do believe that ship was salvaged. They were able to stop the flooding, pump the water, and it was returned to service. With all this said, I'm going to conclude this last chapter of how we lost Amelia Earhart. Again, I'm going to recap. It was a failure of imagination. It was a lack of knowledge about how things work, both on the part of the people who planned the trip and Amelia. I'm not going to say so much on Noonan because he flew the Pacific and he might have had a better grasp of what was going on and she didn't listen to him. Don't know. That's conjecture. However, when they took off, everything came together. As it were, somebody didn't burn leaves to the snow gods, and as a result of that, things went bad for them. So, with that said, Dysfunctional Vet is going to end this part on how we lost Amelia Earhart. Again, this is my opinion, but I have actually done a few of these things, and I think I have a better grasp of what's going on than all these documentaries that just get experts on there who say, I can tell how far away a signal is by listening to it. Yeah. And I'll bet you they can sell you some real estate out in the middle of the ocean where there's no land, too. With that said, Dysfunctional Vet is going to sign off and wish you well. If you like my videos, please consider subscribing and do share.